What happens when discipline meets disrespect? Watch how one man turned chaos into a chance for change. It was supposed to be just another evening. The golden hues of the setting sun painted the sky above a small park in Savannah, Georgia, casting long shadows over joggers, families, and friends sharing laughs. Among them was Terence, a man with a presence that didn't demand attention, but often caught it nonetheless. He sat on a weathered bench, sipping from a water bottle, his calm demeanor a stark contrast to the lively energy around him. Terence wasn't in a hurry. He never was. Life, he believed, was best enjoyed in its quiet, simple moments. But peace doesn't always last. From the corner of his eye, Terence noticed a group of young men lingering near the basketball court. Their laughter carried a different tone, sharp, mocking, and tinged with malice. He'd heard laughter like that before. It was the kind that wasn't born out of humor, but from the cruel amusement of those looking for a target. And today, Terence was that target. "Yo, big man," one of them shouted, loud enough to cut through the chatter of the park. The gang's leader, a wiry figure with a shaved head, pointed at Terence with exaggerated gestures. "What's up with the heavyweight division over there? Ain't it gym day?" The others burst into laughter, feeding off their leader's energy. Terence's heart didn't skip a beat. He'd been here before, too many times to count. His thick skin wasn't just a metaphor. It was armor forged by years of ridicule. But armor doesn't mean you don't feel the hits. He considered ignoring them, brushing it off as another moment of ignorance to let slide. But there was a shift in the air, an electric charge that told him ignoring it wouldn't be enough this time. But Terence had no idea just how far this would go, or how much he'd be forced to reveal about himself in the moments that followed. Terence had always been a man of contrasts. At first glance, he seemed unassuming. A middle-aged man in his early 40s with a soft build and an easygoing aura. Yet there was a quiet strength about him, one that spoke to a history far richer and more complex than most would guess. Terence had once been a martial artist, competing at the regional level in his 20s. His specialty was Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu, a discipline that required not just brute strength, but immense mental clarity and patience. But life hadn't been kind in recent years. After losing his wife in a car accident, Terence fell into a spiral of grief, using food as a way to cope. He left competitive fighting and, over time, grew distant from the life he once knew. The sleek, lean competitor he had been gave way to someone heavier, quieter, and more introspective. Yet, beneath it all, his discipline never truly left him. To outsiders, Terence's slow walks in the park, or his occasional laughter at the local cafe, painted the picture of a man at ease. What they didn't see were the early mornings he spent alone in his garage, a mat rolled out, practicing drills he learned decades ago. They didn't see the nights when he shadowboxed in the dim light, sweat pouring down his face as he fought not opponents, but the demons of his past. Terence's relationship with the park was special. It was his sanctuary, a place where he could breathe and feel connected to the world without being overwhelmed by it. He'd watch the children run, listen to the rhythm of sneakers hitting the pavement, and let himself remember what peace felt like. But not everyone shared his sense of calm. Savannah was known for its charm, but it wasn't immune to its own share of trouble. Lately, the local news had been buzzing with stories about a group of young men causing trouble around the area. They weren't hardened criminals, just reckless boys who found power in numbers and chaos. It was the kind of crowd that fed off vulnerability, seeking out anyone they believed wouldn't fight back. And to them, Terence probably seemed like the perfect target. A big guy, moving slowly, alone. What could he possibly do? But the gang's assumptions couldn't have been more wrong, and they were about to find out just how wrong they were. The mocking laughter grew louder as the gang made their way toward Terence. There were 4 of them, each one emboldened by the presence of the others. Their leader, who seemed to revel in the attention, strutted forward with exaggerated confidence. His voice was sharp, cutting through the gentle hum of the park. "Hey, big man, you deaf or you just ignoring us?" he called out, smirking as his friends egged him on. Terence looked up slowly, his expression calm and unreadable. He took a deliberate sip from his water bottle before placing it on the bench beside him. Years ago, he might have snapped back, but he'd learned that reacting impulsively often gave people like this exactly what they wanted. "I heard you," he replied evenly, his tone devoid of anger or fear. "What do you want?" The leader's smirk widened. "What do we want? Well, for starters, maybe some tips on how to bulk up like you. That's a lot of weight to carry around, man. How do you even get off the couch?" The group erupted into laughter, their voices grating and relentless. Terence didn't flinch. He'd been in situations like this before. But then one of the others stepped forward, a wiry teenager with a baseball cap turned backward, and shoved Terence lightly on the shoulder. "You're in our park, man. Maybe you should keep walking before we make you." The shove was nothing compared to the blows Terence had taken in his training days, but it wasn't about the force. It was about the intent. He could feel the heat rising in his chest, but he forced himself to stay still. Violence wasn't his first choice, not anymore. "I'm not looking for trouble," Terence said, his voice low but steady. "Just let me enjoy my evening, and I'll leave you to yours." But bullies don't back down when they think they've found easy prey. Instead, they pushed harder. The leader grabbed the water bottle from the bench and threw it to the ground, its contents spilling over the pavement. "Oops," he sneered. "Looks like your evening just got a little worse." Terence stood up slowly. His full height towered over the group, and for a brief moment there was a flicker of hesitation in their eyes. But it passed as quickly as it came. They weren't afraid of size. They were counting on the fact that Terence wouldn't fight back. But this wasn't about fear or intimidation for Terence. It was about control. Control of the situation. Control of himself. He glanced at the water bottle on the ground, and then back at the group. "This is your last chance," he said, his voice firm but calm. "Walk away." The leader laughed, a forced sound that betrayed his unease. "Or what? You gonna sit on us?" That was it. The moment everything shifted. One of the boys lunged forward, reaching for Terence's arm. The move was sloppy, uncoordinated, a mistake Terence's instincts caught instantly. He sidestepped, grabbed the boy's wrist, and twisted just enough to send him sprawling to the ground. The gang's laughter stopped cold. But this wasn't the end. It was just the beginning of something they would never forget. The silence that followed was deafening. The boy on the ground clutched his wrist, groaning in pain but not seriously hurt. Terence hadn't applied enough pressure to injure him, just enough to send a message. The others stood frozen for a moment, unsure of what to do. Then, as if on cue, they rushed at him together, hoping their numbers would overpower him. Terence's body moved before his mind could register the chaos. Years of training had ingrained every reaction deep into his muscle memory. The first punch came from the left, wild and untrained. Terence ducked, sweeping his leg to the side and sending the attacker stumbling off balance. Another boy lunged from the right, his fists flailing. Terence sidestepped and caught his arm, twisting it into a controlled lock that brought him to his knees. The leader hesitated, his bravado cracking as he watched his crew crumble. "What the hell, man?" he barked, his voice shaking slightly. "You think you're some kind of ninja?" Terence didn't answer. He was focused, his breath steady, his movements precise. The third boy, emboldened by his leader's taunts, charged at him with a makeshift weapon, a jagged stick he had picked up from the ground. Terence waited until the last second, then sidestepped and disarmed him with a swift motion, the stick clattering to the pavement. The boy stumbled backward, his confidence shattered. The leader, now visibly panicking, backed away, holding up his hands. "All right, man, all right. We're done. You made your point." Terence stepped forward, his towering frame casting a shadow over the gang's self-proclaimed leader. His voice was calm, but carried the weight of authority. "No, you're not done. Not yet. You think strength is about ganging up on someone you think can't fight back. That's not strength. That's cowardice." The leader's bravado was gone, replaced by the raw fear of someone who realized too late that they had underestimated their opponent. "We didn't mean anything by it," he muttered, his eyes darting to the ground. Terence shook his head. "You meant every word and every shove, but now you're learning that actions have consequences." He let his words hang in the air for a moment, then took a step back. "Pick up your friend and get out of here. And next time you feel like proving yourself, try doing something that actually matters." The gang scrambled to help their fallen member, mumbling apologies under their breath. They stumbled away, glancing over their shoulders as if expecting Terence to follow. But he didn't. He simply stood there, watching until they disappeared into the distance. But the confrontation wasn't over. What Terence didn't realize was that the real impact of this moment would ripple through the park in ways he hadn't expected. As the gang disappeared, the stillness in the park was almost eerie. All eyes were on Terence now. Parents who had pulled their children close during the commotion began to loosen their grips. Runners slowed their pace, and conversations that had paused mid-sentence didn't resume. The park had transformed into a silent audience, processing what they had just witnessed. Terence exhaled deeply, shaking off the tension from his body. He bent down to pick up his water bottle, now lying empty and crumpled on the ground. As he straightened up, a voice called out from behind him. "That was something else," an older man said, stepping forward cautiously. He wore a faded baseball cap and had the weathered look of someone who'd spent years working outdoors. "You handled that better than most would have." Terence gave him a small nod, unsure of what to say. He wasn't looking for praise or recognition, but he could feel the weight of the community's eyes on him. A young woman approached next, holding a toddler in her arms. "Are you okay?" she asked, her voice tinged with concern. "They didn't hurt you, did they?" "I'm fine," Terence replied, his tone even. "I just didn't want things to get out of hand." From the edge of the park, someone clapped. It was a slow, deliberate sound that quickly grew as others joined in. The applause wasn't thunderous, but it carried a strange mix of admiration and gratitude. Terence felt his cheeks grow warm. He wasn't used to being the center of attention, and this wasn't how he wanted it. But not everyone was celebrating. A man in a business suit who had been watching from a bench stood up and approached Terence with a furrowed brow. "You think that was the right way to handle it?" he asked sharply. "What if they had weapons? What if someone else had gotten hurt?" Terence met his gaze, unflinching. "And what would you have done?" he asked simply. The man opened his mouth to respond, but then hesitated. He didn't have an answer. A murmur spread through the crowd, a mix of agreement and lingering doubts. People began to voice their thoughts, some praising Terence for standing up to the bullies, others questioning whether the confrontation could have been avoided altogether. The park, once a quiet haven, had become a forum for a much larger conversation. Terence raised a hand, silencing the chatter. "Look," he said, his voice steady but firm. "I didn't want this to happen, but I wasn't going to let them walk all over me either. We talk about wanting a better community, but that doesn't happen by ignoring the problem. Sometimes standing your ground is the only way to teach a lesson." The crowd fell silent again, his words sinking in. A few nodded in agreement. Others exchanged uneasy glances, grappling with their own feelings about what had unfolded. But this wasn't just about the fight. It was about what came next, and Terence knew he had to be the one to start that conversation. As the park slowly returned to its usual rhythm, Terence found himself surrounded by a small group of people eager to speak with him. Some wanted to thank him for taking a stand, while others asked questions about how he had stayed so calm in the face of aggression. Terence answered simply with humility, but the truth was clear in every word. Strength wasn't just physical, it was about discipline, control, and knowing when to act. A boy no older than 10 tugged on his mother's sleeve before stepping forward shyly. "Mister, are you like a superhero or something?" he asked, his eyes wide with awe. Terence smiled softly. "No, kid, just a regular guy who doesn't like bullies." The boy grinned, and his mother gave Terence a grateful nod. But as the crowd thinned, one of the park's regulars, a schoolteacher named Angela, lingered behind, She approached Terence, her expression thoughtful. "You know," she began, "what you did today was more than self-defense. Those kids, they've been harassing people here for weeks, and no one's known how to stop them. Maybe what they needed was to be reminded they're not invincible." Terence sighed, his gaze drifting to the path where the gang had retreated. "I hope they take this as a wake-up call," he said. "But what they really need is someone to show them a better way. They're just kids, lost and looking for a sense of power. I've been there too." Angela tilted her head, curious. "What do you mean?" He hesitated, then said, "When I was younger, I had my fair share of anger. Life wasn't easy, and I lashed out. Martial arts taught me discipline, gave me focus, and helped me see there was a better way to handle life's challenges. Maybe if someone reached out to those boys before they got to this point, things could have been different." Angela considered his words, a flicker of inspiration crossing her face. "Maybe it's not too late. What if you're the one to show them that way?" Terence chuckled, shaking his head. "I'm no mentor. I barely know what I'm doing half the time." "None of us do," Angela replied with a smile. "But you've got something they don't, a chance to teach them what strength really looks like." Her words stayed with Terence long after she left. As the sun dipped below the horizon, painting the park in shades of twilight, he sat back down on the bench, lost in thought. Strength wasn't just about standing your ground. It was about lifting others up, even those who had tried to knock you down. The next day, Terence made a decision. He visited the local community center and spoke to the director about starting a self-defense and mentorship program for troubled youth. It wouldn't fix everything, but it was a start. And sometimes, that's all it takes to change a life. This story isn't just about standing up to bullies. It's about finding the strength within ourselves to create change, even when it's hard. If this story moved you, take a moment to reflect on how you can make a difference in your own community. And don't forget to subscribe for more stories like this, where everyday moments remind us of the extraordinary power of courage and compassion.